So when you think of Nigeria, what's the first thing that comes to mind? A bustling modern nation? A cultural giant? Well, the story is so much deeper than that. We're about to go on a journey through thousands of years of history, from some of Africa's earliest civilizations all the way to the complex powerhouse it is today.
Okay, let's just dive right in. And we're not starting in the 20th century, or even the 15th. No, the story of the people in this region goes back thousands upon thousands of years. What you're looking at here isn't just a painting on a rock. It's like a window into a truly ancient past.
All right, so let's start at the very beginning. We need to lay the foundations to really understand the incredible empires and cultures that would eventually rise up in this region.
I mean, just think about that for a second. We're talking about a time when woolly mammoths were still roaming parts of the earth. Human history here is profoundly ancient. People have been living in this region continuously for over 15,000 years. It's just incredible.
This right here, this sculpture, gives us a glimpse into one of the earliest complex societies to emerge, the Nok. And we're not talking about primitive art here. This is a highly stylized, really expressive terracotta piece from a civilization that was flourishing 3,500 years ago.
And you know, the Nok weren't just artists, they were innovators. They were among the very first societies in West Africa to figure out iron smelting. That was a huge technological leap that let them create stronger tools and weapons, and it completely changed their society.
And that spirit of innovation, it goes back even further. Long before the Nok, people here were building amazing things. The Dafuna canoe, found in Yobe State, is over 8,000 years old. That makes it the oldest boat ever discovered in all of Africa. Just amazing. So you can see how from these ancient roots, these incredible civilizations started to form. Let's take a look at how this foundation led to an age of sprawling, powerful, and artistically brilliant empires.
Just look at the craftsmanship here. Seriously. On the left, you've got a bronze from the Ife Empire, and on the right, one from the Benin Empire. These weren't just pretty objects. They were symbols of immense political, spiritual, and economic power, made using a metal casting technique that was incredibly sophisticated.
And these were just a few of the major players on the scene. You had Ife, which was the spiritual center, and there was the Oyo Empire, which dominated with its powerful savannah cavalry. The Benin Empire was a major political force for centuries, and the Kingdom of Enri was the ancient sort of theocratic heart of Igbo culture.
But the story isn't just in the south. I mean, look at the scale of this map. Up in the north, you had the Sahelian Empire of Kanem-Bornu. This was a dominant force for 1,000 years, controlling the crucial trade routes that cut right across the Sahara Desert, connecting West Africa to the Mediterranean. And these northern states had a really different character than the forest kingdoms. They were deeply connected to the wider Islamic world. Cities like Kano became these huge centers for scholarship, law, and commerce, where goods, ideas, and faith were traveling across continents. But these established worlds were about to get completely reshaped by powerful new forces. Forces that arrived from both across the desert and across the ocean. This was a major turning point. So let's trace how this happened. Islam arrives in the north around the 11th century, and it totally reshapes those Sahelian empires. Then, in the 1470s, the first Europeans, the Portuguese, show up on the coast. This leads to trade, but that trade slowly becomes focused on one horrific thing, and it hits its peak in the 18th century. Then, by 1885, the whole game changes when Europe basically decides to claim the continent for itself. And this brings us to a really grim point. The Europeans started renaming the region based on the horrific product they were extracting. What was once this network of powerful kingdoms became known to the rest of the world as simply the Slave Coast. That name alone tells its own tragic story.
And this object you see, a manila, was a form of currency used in that trade. These brass bracelets were mass-produced in Europe and then exchanged for goods. But, most devastatingly, they were exchanged for human lives. This fueled conflict and just tore apart the fabric of so many societies.
So after the slave trade was abolished, European interest didn't just go away. It shifted from trade to direct control. And that ushered in the British colonial era, a period with a really complex and deeply contradictory legacy.
This is the key year. 1914. This is when the British colonial administration took two huge, distinct territories, the southern and northern protectorates, and just mashed them together into one entity.
The borders of modern Nigeria, they weren't drawn by Africans. They were drawn by British administrators in an office.
You know, British rule was a real study in contrasts. On one hand, yeah, they built infrastructure like railways and introduced some elements of modern administration in schools. But on the other hand, it was all designed for one thing: exploitation. It was about extracting resources, holding down local economies, and drawing borders that totally ignored the complex ethnic realities on the ground, creating tensions that would last for generations.
So this colonial creation now had to forge its own identity. And this is where the story of modern Nigeria really begins, a journey just filled with incredible promise, but also immense peril.
October 1st, 1960. Nigeria gains its independence from Britain. Can you imagine? It was a moment of just incredible optimism and celebration, the birth of what so many hoped would become a beacon for a newly independent Africa.
But the reality? Well, it was much tougher. The nation was almost torn apart by the tragic Biafran War. It went through decades of military rule, and yet, through all of that, there's been this incredible resilience. You see the return to democracy in 1999, the world-class handling of the Ebola crisis, and of course, the explosion of Nigerian culture onto the global stage through Nollywood and Afrobeats.
This is Aso Rock. It's this massive formation that overlooks Abuja, the capital. It's a pretty fitting symbol for the nation's endurance and its strength. But as we'll see, modern Nigeria is a place of really stark contrasts.
And this slide really captures that perfectly. On one hand, you have a staggering security challenge. Almost 40% of the population personally knows a victim of kidnapping. But on the other hand, you have this unbelievable innovation. Nigeria is home to most of Africa's billion-dollar tech startups, the so-called unicorns. Promise and peril, living side by side.
So, from the Nok artist to the Oyo cavalry, from the trauma of the slave coast to the incredible dynamism of today's tech scene, Nigeria's story is one of resilience, creativity, and deep complexity. The only real question is, what comes next?